And I'm going to start with just kind of give you guys a background of sort of the title of this panel, which is Nebraska Ground Zero question mark. And part of the conversation that Krista and I were having around the CJS amendment was just, there's a lot of firsts going on in Nebraska. And so I just want to give you guys just a quick background why Nebraska is now the new ground zero. A lot of people who kind of just got involved in the medical cannabis space often look at these state programs and say, wow, this is so weird. It's so different than any other type of medicine. And the reality is that it is very different, and it's different for a few reasons. Plant that has gone through prohibition, but there's also not a current pathway for complex botanicals. And so after Bush Sr. actually closed down a federal program that was distributing medical cannabis to patients, we had to go to the states actually to ask for first protection from arrest and then eventually access programs. And so, the goal of medical cannabis advocacy has never been the state programs. They're literally triage to get patients off the battlefield of the war on drugs. It's just taken a lot longer than we thought to get this next phase. But we have figured out a lot of ways to get medical cannabis to patients through this 30-year experiment. And part of what we're working on here in DC is to take all the lessons from these programs. But as soon as we take one step forward, we see, new policies like the crazy hemp bill, which really, before that we were just talking about medical cannabis and we were talking about adult use. And then we had a lot of patients, including a lot of people in Nebraska, who didn't have access through a state program, who were, utilizing the loopholes in the hemp bill for access to cannabinoid medicines. And, everyone was hoping that the FDA was going to step forward and regulate these products. And they said what we knew they were going to say, which is that they can't regulate cannabinoids, which is why we're ultimately working towards a bigger vision. Since we're running late, I just want you guys to know this is all in here, and I'll share the presentation with you. But we also have, of course, the recent executive order that is confusing people. People have misconceptions about what it will mean if there is Schedule 3. It doesn't actually do much. We still will have to pass federal legislation for access. But that brings us back to this current fight around the Department of Justice budget. And, we started the year last year with Trump leaving the language that we've passed every year to stop the Department of Justice from interfering with the state medical cannabis laws. Starting in 1996, when California passed the very first medical cannabis state law, we saw, reactions from the Department of Justice to try to shut it down. And that started with threatening doctors, then threatening state employees, and moved on to paramilitary style raids of dispensaries and of cultivators, and ultimately ended up with almost $1 billion, like $750 million spent across 3 presidencies to try to stop these medical cannabis programs that exist in conflict with the federal law, but it can be in conflict with federal law. And so ultimately, after years of dealing with this interference, in 2014, we finally passed what we thought was going to be just a ceasefire to stop the Department of Justice from interfering with these state medical cannabis laws. So in 2014, there were 16 states that had medical cannabis programs. And so the CJS amendment had 16 states in it. And the reason that we have to put every state into that language is because of the limitations of federalism, right? Like you actually have to name the state to make sure that those funds aren't spent there. And so, leading up, we were able to actually get a lot of patient organizations involved to make sure that that language stayed in there. We were, had patients all over the country writing op-eds. We're doing a lot of citizen lobbying, and ultimately, we were able to, keep the language in as we had before, but we could not get Nebraska added. And this is a first. Over the last 12 years, every time a new state passes, the states just get added. And we're not exactly sure why, but I have a feeling some of our other speakers are going to help us with some of that insight. And so, this is a first. And I think what is more infuriating is that you have a senator on the appropriations, and you have some of the most dedicated advocates I've ever met in Nebraska, who I know were talking to their delegation. Um, and so here we are, these protections have passed, and the other sort of first is actually just how resistant, and I guess it's just a few people in Nebraska have been to allowing the voter-approved medical cannabis law from moving forward. And another first is having a seated senator actually interfere with the implementation of one of these laws. We've seen we've seen senators and members of Congress weigh in on voter initiatives, but after the bill has passed, we have never seen something like the likes of Ricketts as far as working with the Attorney General to try to stop these laws. And so I'm going to stop there and I'll pick back up some of the other ground zero component. And I want to hand it over to Krista, who is going to be a saint. She's already a patron saint, as far as I'm concerned. Just with the level of hostility that she's had to deal with in the state of Nebraska, and again, not from the voters, right? She has 71% of Nebraskans behind her as far as supporting medical cannabis. But I will hand it over to you, Krista, to tell us a little bit about just the process that you've been through and what it means to not have these protections come through at such a vulnerable time.
Thanks, Jeff, for organizing this. And we became alerted several weeks ago that Nebraska had been left out. And obviously, that's concerning on so many levels for patients in this state, for the industry that is up and coming in this state. Voters overwhelmingly supported medical cannabis at the ballot last November of 24. And that isn't when the conversation started. This conversation has been going on in Nebraska for well over a decade when parents saw children with epilepsy getting help in other states with cannabis treatment. And so they started engaging lawmakers, educating. And so this has been a long, long, long fight. And to see the fight go from the legislative efforts that year after year failed, we took it to the voters. The voters spoke, and we see the same opposition that we have experienced for a decade from the same people. The fact that our federal delegates, an individual, Deb Fisher, was on the Appropriations Committee where this went through, was alerted that Nebraska, a newly state that is newly on board with medical cannabis laws, the fact that we were not added to the rider to provide the same protections that every other state has on this, you really have to wonder why and who is behind this. This wasn't an oversight in our eyes. We have talked to so many different individuals out on Capitol Hill, advocates that are advocating and lobbying at the federal level on this. And, from our perspective, and, Dominic Gillen will weigh in, who has been at this even longer than I have, is that our current U.S. Senator Pete Ricketts has been one of the most outspoken anti-medical cannabis officials, I believe, in the country. And as you
Yes.
mentioned, even after the voters spoke during the implementation phase last spring, we saw Senator Ricketts do an op-ed with our Attorney General and tell the legislature to stand down and not pass anything to move this issue forward. His administration has warned against legalization. They've opposed legislative bills. They continuously frame medical cannabis as this dangerous drug. And so, the state agencies under his leadership, our attorney general, our governor, our lawmakers have have been listening to him. And I think this is really the final straw for us in the state of seeing that now he's taking it to Washington. And the impact is yet to be seen, but I think it leaves patients in a very, very difficult position, a compromising position, and what the effects will be, I think, has us very scared.
Krista, I think you have good reason. It's been a while since we've seen federal interference in any of the states with medical cannabis laws, but we're in a very different time right now, and there's actually the pendulum is kind of swinging back. But this also comes to the other part of the ground zero, which is that maybe this strategy of going state by state to get these protections has run its course. Part of why we had to go to the states wasn't just because, again, of the Controlled Substance Act. There's a lot of missing data, right? Because NIH and NIDA hadn't spent any money on researching the benefits. They spent a lot of money on proving the harms, which seems to be a little fruitless. We had to figure out the product safety protocols for cannabis before we would be able to move something forward at the federal level. We had to change the scheduling of cannabis in the UN drug treaties before we'd be able to move forward. And so, in something very significant happened in that along that trajectory in 2023, our two top health agencies, HHS and FDA, actually reported that there is, in fact, currently accepted medical use of cannabis in the United States. And, in our sort of chessboard that we've been playing for a very long time to move national policy forward, that was really supposed to be the last step before we then moved into the federal government figuring out how to get this medicine to patients. And so back at ground zero, again, I've never seen a more, voracious fight, and especially, so underhanded and really focused on patients and the individuals passing the law. And so I'm going to hand it over now to Dominic.
It's a very appropriate. Well, by the way, my name is Dominic Gillen, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. It's very appropriate that you've named this Ground Zero because, quite honestly, my son Will is patient zero in the state of Nebraska.
Mhm.
My wife was, as far as we know, the first parent to go to a legislator in our state, which was 12 years ago this past November, and seek help. And so we have been at this for 12 years. Our son Will is now 23. He suffers from a very rare seizure disorder called Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which basically means he has 4 or 5 different seizure types, which make them extremely difficult, if not impossible, to control all of them. We've looked at for the opportunity to use cannabis as part of what our doctors could use in their toolbox to help Will. And we have fought and fought and fought. We thought we were the only ones, and my wife found out there were more and more people just like us. And then Krista came on board, and just so many people. And it's just grown in this state to be where it used to be it was not a wedge issue, but I think it's becoming a wedge issue just because of the way that it's being handled by a few, and it is a few legislators and elected officials in our state. I don't know, Will's been on countless medications, including black box medications, which are the most severe, labeling by the FDA as possibility of fatality from taking them. He's been on medications that were never intended for children when he was a child, but because they worked with a little bit with adults, it was okay because it was FDA approved. He's currently on one medication that we've been told that to try and wean him off of it would be like weaning someone off of heroin. It's so addictive. And yet, Will's nonverbal. He depends on us for absolutely everything in his life, feeding, bathing, diapering, all of that, all of that kind of stuff. And what's been frustrating throughout the years is we would go to our state legislators and they would say, oh, you need to talk to people at the federal level. We would go to our federal legislators, oh, you need to do it at the state level. So it was like we've just been a political football for the last 12 years in the state of Nebraska. And it's frustrating because now we have something, and those same officials on both sides of whether they be state or federal are still fighting against it, and trying to make sure that this doesn't happen. Um, basically, lying about the things that are in the bill, about what the bill's intentions were, or the petitions, I mean. And, former governor or Senator Ricketts, former Governor Ricketts, we literally were probably 15 feet away from him the day that he made his prophetic, or not prophetic, but his infamous marijuana is going to kill your kids comment. And he was looking, I mean, we were right there in front of him. He knows us because we've met him one time before. And it was what was ironic and interesting was the media that were over there on the other side kind of all looked over at us. It's like, what's your reaction to that? And it's like, all you can do is at some point in time, you just shake your head and say, I just can't believe those things are coming out of people's mouths. I just, so, it's been a frustration. We've moved the ball a long ways, but we should be in a position to be able to do something. And quite honestly, what's happening in Nebraska right now with the governor and the attorney general, they've offered a bill this year to try and clean up something they did last year. And to me, it's a fix-it bill, but it's a fix the mess that their commission created by basically setting up rules and regulations that break the law. And anything that our attorney general puts forth, because he's been behind a lot of this bill making and this amendment, I don't trust at all because he has threatened already to take the commission and take file lawsuits against them. If he's abruptly to write these bills and he's not filing lawsuits, that's because he's put some kind of something in there to make it so that he doesn't have to. He doesn't want to have to take responsibility for the threats that he's already made. So
something that really, as you were talking, caregivers and patients, have had to become legislative experts to get their medicine or to get their loved ones' medicine. And Nebraska will say, while you guys haven't met your immediate goals of getting access, you guys have definitely been an inspiration to a lot of people across the country. Including the dedication that we've seen from some of the individuals in the state legislature who are taking those blows along with you. And so, with that, I would love to introduce Senator Cavanaugh, who has been a amazing patient champion. I there are a lot of people who talk about this issue as if it's someone else's issue, and hearing you, talk in the State House, you're a true advocate. So I'm very excited to have you here.
Well, thanks, Steph. That's a great introduction. It's yeah, following Dominic and Krista is obviously, with great honor to be here and speaking with them. So John Cavanaugh, state senator from District 9, running for Congress this year. And, just as way of history, I've always been a supporter of medical cannabis, circulated the 3 petitions, I think, that it took to finally get on the ballot and pass. Was very excited about the fact that it did pass in 2024 with 71%, and was happy to be in the legislature and the opportunity to pass legislation to help with the sort of framework that was needed to give voice to what the voters voted for. Very disappointed in how the legislature has responded and how the commission and the attorney general and the governor and our senator and others in positions of power have responded to what the voters have clearly spoken that they would like to see. And so, a real watershed moment for me on this journey was when we did town halls and folks like Dominic came and spoke to senators about what their hopes were, and families of so many other kids in particular who are looking for some help, and just so clearly resonated with me, and I think with other lawmakers, that this is really something families are trying to find medicine to help their kids who are suffering. And we have these politicians who are standing in the way because of their misguided beliefs about cannabis, and they can't get past the fact that it is medicine and this is not about recreational consumption. And so in the legislature, we fought for regulations and for availability, for access, but in a way that does not restrict what medicine people can gain access to and who can gain access and which medical professional they can get their recommendation from. And so we fought all of these battles, and we've had people pay lip service to those things on the floor of the legislature and not carry forward. And we have seen, as Dominic talked about, the folks at the highest level of law enforcement in the state threaten families and doctors and the commission if they follow through with the will of the people. So we had an interim study this last year. I filed a complaint against the commission for that overreach of regulations that Dominic talked about. And now we have seen this very troubling aspect where the federal exemption for Nebraska has been left out, which was, I think, driven by our delegation and its continued attempt to undermine what the people want. And so, running for Congress for a number of reasons, but one of them is that we need to make a change at the national level. We need congressional action that is actually going to allow the people of Nebraska to get the medicine that they voted overwhelmingly for, and to allow these families to provide medical care that they desperately need for their children.
Thank you so much for your leadership on this. For a lot of patients like those in Nebraska who have been fighting so hard for access, they're looking at other states, and we are seeing results. We know that having access to cannabis means an improved quality of life, but we also know that it means cost savings for healthcare, right? Like this is now quantifiable information, and this is actually, what led to HHS finding that there's currently accepted medical use was from these experiments. But there's also in all of the states millions of patients that also don't have access, right? So in a state with a medical cannabis law, these are all the stages that a patient would have to go through to get access, right? And so people may not be on the conditions list. They may have a job that still drug tests, right? There's all sorts of barriers that we are just not able to change without a change in federal law. And so I think you guys have definitely had some politicians, pushing Nebraska towards ground zero. But really, I think the sort of what we're seeing is the limitations of what the states can do to provide medicine, and a resistant few, right? That it's really still just a minority that don't want to see medical cannabis move forward. Adult use in some of these states has made it hard for patients to have access. And so we at American Safe Access have been working for 24 years now, to create a federal medical cannabis program that would actually build on what we've learned from the states, and honestly what we've learned from some of the hemp licensing, and follow guidance from international drug treaties. We're expecting to see this bill come in very soon. It's not something that's like some crazy notion. In fact, the Congressional Research Service is discussing a lot of the elements of our bill. The only way that we can now get there is if we have candidates and we have representatives in DC understand the plight of patients. As someone who's been organizing for decades now on this issue, when there was, severe interference from the federal government where we saw, DEA crashing down doors. It was easy to organize around, right? Because people could see what the prohibition looked like, what they could see what the campaign against medical cannabis looked like. And today, it's hard to bring news cameras into your living room. But a lot of the pain and suffering around this issue is happening at the federal level. When Chris and I first started organizing this event, we were focusing on just sort of this really negative sentiment, right? That Nebraska had been left out of out of these protections from CJS. And as we were organizing it, we realized that Nebraska also has a lot of future candidates that do support medical cannabis and are willing, really to put your current delegation to shame. Across the country, leading up to the 2026 election, we're asking candidates to sign a pledge saying that when they get to DC, they will move forward with co-sponsoring legislation that will create access nationwide. And I'm super excited to have Senator Cavanaugh as one of the signers.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk about medical cannabis. It's one of the things that I have become, I guess, talking about a lot. And very happy to. I don't know if you can read, but get the pledge here, which is the compassionate pledge for 2026, which when I'm in Congress, I'm committed to co-sponsoring legislation that will give effect to medical cannabis at the state level, continue to advocate every day in partnership with these families, because that's what you deserve is a partner and not somebody who is going to put themselves first in advocating for cannabis, and to continue to educate people, because this is really a thing that we've learned is there are so many people who are opposed to cannabis for medical purposes because they fundamentally don't understand it. And so continuing that journey of education with folks like Americans for Safe Access and with the families, and then making sure that the agencies and administration are not overstepping and making it harder and harder for folks to access this. So I have a bill that's up this week in the Nebraska legislature that would provide protections for doctors if they make a recommendation in compliance with the statute. And I brought that bill specifically because we hear that Nebraska medical professionals are afraid to recommend cannabis to people because of the repercussions either to their license or to them for liability from threats like the Attorney General. So we will continue to make progress in every place, or push forward in every place that we can until Will gets his medicine, until all of these kids are able to get the medicine that we have voted for and that we're promising to them. So thanks for having me here.
Thank you, John. And now I'd like to also introduce the other signer from Nebraska, who is taking on someone we've been talking about a lot, and actually who's a pretty disliked person across the country, not just for his comments on on medical cannabis or cannabis in general, which are pretty bombastic, but also because he's bringing a new, it's like a new face of federalism, right? We're seeing this in all sorts of different policies across the country, but having a sitting senator try to interfere with a law that 71% of the electorate supported is just unheard of, and I'm pretty sure that is not what Republicans of just a recent past would be standing for. So I'd like to hand it over to Dan.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Krista. Thank you, everybody, for having me on here. It's important to me, but I mean, ultimately, it's pretty simple for me. I signed the pledge because 71% of Nebraskans already did. They voted for it. They signed the petitions. They showed up. My job that I'm applying for is to represent the people, right? And the people in this state have already spoken. So I mean, really, at its essence, it's really that simple. But I've held over 230 public events across the state. I hear the same things everywhere I go, from Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Independents alike. There's a lot of people in pain. There's a lot of veterans suffering from PTSD, and they're furious that politicians keep getting in the way. And this really isn't a partisan issue. The only people that are fighting it are the politicians who think they know better than the patients and the caregivers, which is it's completely ridiculous to even think of that notion. But as an industrial mechanic, I know people with pain that never leaves, who can't sleep through the night, who are handed opiates instead of options, and they deserve every treatment that science has to offer. The medical cannabis is certainly one of them. And, we got to be clear about who we're fighting this fight against. Here's Pete Ricketts in his own words, and these are real quotes. There's no such thing as medical marijuana. If you legalize marijuana, you're going to kill your kids. We all know that one. Cannabis is harmful, easily abused, and is not safe to consume, even under medical supervision. And this one, he said at a press conference to a room full of veterans, there's no data to support that medical cannabis can help PTSD sufferers. And that's wild to me, because I know a lot of veterans who don't have a medical card that use cannabis, well, I suppose against the law, and it does help. I don't need research to know. I have friends who it helps. But we need that federal law changed, so that no hostile commission, no attorney general, no billionaire politician can keep standing between Nebraskans and their medicines. Right now, without federal legislation, millions of patients face an impossible choice: follow your doctor's advice or risk losing benefits, federal benefits, your housing, your job, even. And nobody should have to choose between their rights and their health. And federal prohibition is also blocking the research that this medicine deserves. Science should be driving this, not politics. Pretty simple too. But I think with my election, and when I'm elected senator, what it means for Nebraska is finally to have a senator who will vote and align federal law with the science and with the will of the people. I will co-sponsor legislation to build a real national medical cannabis program with proper safety standards, real research, investment, and protection, so patients are not penalized for following their doctor's advice. And the families who have been waiting over a decade earned this, and I'm going to make the fight real. I think it transcends parties, and the people who do understand it, like Senator Cavanaugh was saying, people don't understand it, but the ones who do, even though it might not be for them, they might not need it, they understand it, and we're gonna continue the fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. And, I can't think of a better way to launch this campaign. Someone who's taking on one of the most ridiculous of our opponents. But it really just shows how out of touch people can be on this issue. And like Dominique and Krista were saying, I hope that no one ever needs medical cannabis, right? We're not here because we want everyone to take it. We're not trying to put it in the water. But what we would like to see are politicians like yourself and like Senator Cavanaugh in DC who understand that we may not know everything about medical cannabis, but we know enough to see that it's helping. And this, we're at a time where 90% of our health budget is going towards chronic diseases, where there are no pharmaceutical treatments. There is no option. And just because either scientists can't understand the complexity of a plant yet, because our scientific tools aren't fine enough to understand that, or because no one's going to make enough money off of a plant, that should not be the problem of patients, and definitely not children in this country who, 95% of people with rare diseases, there is no pharmaceutical solution. It is again so exciting that we're kicking off the Compassionate Candidate Campaign here in Nebraska at Ground Zero, because I think that the other reason you guys are Ground Zero is because of the amazing work that Dominique has been doing for, for all this time, the amazing work that you've been doing. You've done everything right, and there isn't a pathway for access. And I think part of this election and where we are just with this issue is that a lot of people are not talking to their federal officials about medical cannabis, and there's a lot of reasons why that's the case. Many people just feel like they're not going to get listened to, or people think that Schedule 3 is somehow going to fix everything, or that they don't understand that hemp just the loophole around hemp just got closed. But I think that what makes me so hopeful is that I know that when patients advocate for themselves at the federal level, we see a response. And we have now moved every barrier out of the way for a federal medical cannabis program. And again, I think Dominique, we were just talking about this the other night. When I founded ASA 24 years ago as a cocky 25-year-old. I didn't think it was going to take this long, but I think what we're seeing right now, and not just in Nebraska, but in states that have passed medical cannabis laws, is that advocates and patients they're just wearing themselves down. You mentioned the 40, it's like 49 states that have some kind of law, 46 have distribution programs, and but we have passed over 1,200 pieces of legislation to clean those bills up. And there's nowhere else for us to go but to finally, deal with the elephant in the room. And the good news is that we've also been doing it right, right? HHS and FDA are behind us. You guys have 71% of the voters there. We still carry over 90% support nationwide. And I think that when you put all of these pieces together, what we really need is grassroots activism. We need people this election going and talking to their candidates. And I have to say, talking to Dan and Senator Cavanaugh, if that's the reaction we're going to get in this campaign, then I think that we're going to have a freshman class in the 120th that can finish this job. Look at the Compassionate Candidate Campaign, right? If not in your state, this is something that it's a low bar to get involved. We have a petition asking people to say that they do want to vote for compassionate candidates. So there's a start. And with that, I'm just gonna let our speakers sort of have a few last words, and we'll start with you, John.
Oh,
Yes.
no, I really appreciate having us, and I agree that we need the people are with us on this issue. The people really want to see a functioning medical cannabis system, and we need elected officials who reflect that. And so we need to hold people accountable at the ballot box so that they are actually representing our perspective. So anybody running for legislature, for Congress, for Senate, for governor, for attorney general, we need to ask them, we need to hold them accountable on these issues. So they can't hide and then get into elected office and vote against what their constituents voted for. And we need real policy, not just lip service. The bill that the legislature is potentially considering is, I think, some window dressing and not something that will actually make cannabis more accessible in Nebraska. But I really appreciate being here, and it is really important that we make progress at the state level, but at the national level as well, to make sure that we are not continuing to have a patchwork of systems where you can maybe get access in one state, and then if you cross over, a state boundary, you have a different system, and so people have to make those kind of decisions. So I really appreciate the work of this. I'm committed to making sure that we are not resting until every patient has access to medicine. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Senator Cavanaugh. Spoken like a true compassionate candidate. Dan, I'll hand it over to you.
Again, it was an honor to be here. Again, you have my word. But what I'm going to do in the meantime is, I mentioned I did 230 public events. I'm going to continue traveling the state all the way up until November. And, this is one of the issues that always come up. And, and I know we're on the right side of it. Absolutely. Every time it is brought up, I mean, it's well, it's in the crosstabs of all the polling that we've gotten back is ballot initiatives and the fact that our federal delegation, as well as within the state, are fighting the will of the people. It's uh, it's promising. That's what people seem to be most angry about, as well as they should be on some levels. So. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go, and I figure it's my job to go across the state when I'm, in certain rooms, whether it's Mesex Bar in Columbus getting heckled, or whether it's in Scotts Bluff or Chadron or Norfolk or Fremont. Every time this issue is going to be getting brought up, and hopefully we can have a lot of meaningful conversations around it. That's what I'm going to be doing.
Well, thank you so much. And again, such an honor to be kicking off this campaign with you. We're definitely going to be following your campaign, making sure you signing it is the first part. We're going to be educating other elected officials, and then we're going to be, putting out voter guides. We can't endorse candidates, but we can tell everyone who has signed it. And I have a feeling Ricketts is probably not going to sign it. I mean, I gave him a copy. We'll see what happens. But thank you so much, Dan, for your support. We can't wait to have you here in Washington.
Of course, yeah.
Krista, any final words?
Yeah, again, I appreciate you shedding light on how important this is at the federal level, but also to those of us in Nebraska. We have seen that Nebraskans did their part. They organized, they advocated, they signed petitions, and then they voted. They gave a very, very clear mandate. And I believe that the leaders who are elected in office are put there to represent the people. That is their job. Their job is to represent the people, to represent the will of the people, and to do that both at the state level and the federal level. And right now, we are seeing those elected, those that their job is to represent us, they are not respecting and not doing their job. And so, although we aren't endorsing, we're not pushing who we believe we should be elected. My message to people is on this issue, and this is just one of many, we have seen what happens when we put people in office to represent us who are not going to respect the constituents they represent. So know who you're voting for. When an issue is important, 71% of people have spoken on this issue. Clearly, it is important to Nebraskans. Make sure that you're doing, unfortunately, the next part, which is going back to the ballot and casting your ballot, your vote for people that are going to carry that, again, both here at the state level, but also at the federal level, because right now that voice is being tossed aside. And I think that should make Nebraskans, it should make all people in this country very, very angry.
No, thank you for that, Krista. And I think, looking at sort of what Dan said, what Senator Cavanaugh said, there's not a more popular issue. I mean, I don't think 90% of Americans can decide if they like oatmeal cookies versus chocolate chip, right? Like, there is not an issue that carries 90% support across this country. And Krista, I know you guys are battle tested. You guys truly are an inspiration, and I'm sure that you're ready to stop being an inspiration and start being a mother again, and not having to be at every state house. But we're so thankful for the work that you do. So
Thanks, Steph.
thankful. Uh, Dominique?
If you Google Will Gillen, you'll find lots and lots and lots of articles about our whole struggle and about the journey that we have been on and that he has been on for these past 12 years. And I also want to make mention of the fact that in Nebraska, the Omaha tribe has done this the right way already in a short amount of time. And that is who a lot of people in the eastern part of Nebraska are looking towards to be able to actually go there and access cannabis for their needs under the way the laws are written now. But the governor and the attorney general have both threatened to put law enforcement at the border of the reservation. So for those of you at the national level, this is crazy to be able to have to say that. The local people who are on here understand and already know that.
Yep.
But I would leave you with this. And I always felt like the miracle would be when Will had the medicine. And what I have come to find out is that my mantra has always been don't quit 5 minutes before the miracle happens, right? And my belief was that the miracle would be the end goal. That would be the miracle. What I have found is that the miracles have happened all along the way over the past 12 years. And those miracles are changing people's minds. They are touching people's lives. They are my son Will, who has never spoken a word in his entire life, literally speaking to thousands and thousands of people in this state without ever having said a word because of who he is and what he represents. And couldn't have been a bigger and better, more of a blessing to myself, to our family, and to the people in Nebraska. Because, like I said, without ever having actually spoken a word, he has touched thousands and thousands of lives. And I just want to thank you for the platform and the opportunity to speak today. And thank you.
No, thank you, Dominic. You are definitely an inspiration to so many people, and so is Will. And I think you're, as someone who's on a 24-year journey myself, definitely there have been a lot of miracles along the way. I've met so many amazing people. But I also, when people call Americans for safe access, it's usually not to say, hey, everything's going great. I have access, like it's going well. And just our the emails we get into just the general email, the phone messages will just break your heart of people who have nowhere to go and no one to talk to, and who are literally looking for second and third jobs just to pay out of pocket to be a part of some of these state programs. Part of the journey that we have been on, and I like to say, we're right on time, is that the criminal justice side of cannabis is just one part of the history of medical cannabis. To really understand the nuances of what's happening, you have to understand the limitations of scientific discovery and drug development and how this country has treated botanical medicines, right? All of those sort of histories intertwine. When cannabis was taken off of the U.S. pharmacopoeia in the 40s, it wasn't just picking on cannabis. There were over 200 other natural compounds that were removed. And it was literally because we didn't have the scientific tools to understand them. And so, while our fights have been long and we all have battle scars, and we definitely have seen a lot of miracles along the way, I think that 120th Congress is going to be right on time, where we can give our compassionate candidates who will then, once they're in DC, will be medical cannabis champions. They'll be, standing on the platform of not just all of our stories, millions of individual patients' experiences, but also data from around the globe, a recognition at the international level that there's accepted medical use, recognition in HHS and FDA. And it seems to me if everybody agrees this is medicine, we should be able to figure out how to get it to the people who need it. So again, thank you so much, Dan. Thank you so much, Senator Cavanaugh. Thank you, Krista. Thank you, Dominic, for everything that you guys do. And let's make this election count, because it's not just about moving forward. The reality is that your senator is a part of a growing opposition to cannabis. It may just be a couple people funding them, but they're coming after us again. And so if we don't move forward, we're gonna fall back. Get on the website, thecompassionatecandidate.org. Bring this to people running for office, for Congress, for Senate. Send it to your family, to your friends. Tap the person in front of you at the supermarket. Maybe give them personal space. But it's time to organize. Let's get out of Facebook, out of the algorithms and go talk to our neighbors because literally you can't find another issue where more people agree with you. They just don't know that we're here and that we're fighting for their rights. So thank you all so much.